Gunshots shattered the desert silence. Sheriff Jake Morgan dove behind a boulder as bullets ricocheted off stone, showering him with stinging fragments. The banker's daughter, Emma, sobbed beside him, her dress torn and dirty from 3 days of captivity. "Run for the horses when I tell you," Jake growled, checking his Colt. 2 bullets left, 6 outlaws firing. The odds were worse than bad. He'd tracked the Blackwater gang for 14 days across 3 counties after they'd robbed the Copper Creek Bank and taken Emma hostage. Now, deep in Navajo territory, it had come to this. "Now!" Jake roared, standing and firing both remaining shots. One outlaw dropped, another clutched his shoulder. Emma sprinted for the horses as Jake had instructed. Jake made it 3 steps before Victor Blackwater's bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Through dust and pain, he saw Emma escape on his stallion. At least the girl was safe. "Finish him, boys," Blackwater ordered, his voice cold as a rattler's hiss. "Then find the girl." The last thing Jake saw was gun barrels aimed at his chest. Then darkness. 3 days later, Jake Morgan stumbled through the merciless desert on unsteady legs. Each step was a deliberate act of will against the pain shooting through his body. His right hand clutched his left shoulder, fingers sticky with dried blood, where the bullet had torn through flesh and muscle. Black vultures circled lazily overhead, patient sentinels waiting for him to join the bleached bones that dotted the landscape. Jake's hand trembled as he drew his empty revolver and pointed it skyward. "Not yet, you bastards," he croaked, his voice barely audible even to himself. The gun clicked impotently, and he laughed, a dry, broken sound that hurt his cracked lips. Jake was 45, though the lines etched into his weathered face suggested a man a decade older. His tall frame, normally imposing at 6'2", was now hunched with fatigue and pain. His blue eyes, normally sharp and alert, were now reddened and sunken into his gaunt face. The silver star pinned to his vest had lost its shine, much like the man who wore it. Jake Morgan, sheriff of Copper Creek, was dying in the desert, miles from anyone who might care, and further still from justice. The hallucinations had started about an hour ago. First came the dizziness, then the confusion, and finally the visions of Mary and little David, their faces as they'd been before the fever took them. They seemed to beckon him from the shadows between rocks. As consciousness began to fade, Jake saw a shadow fall across his face, not the merciful shade of a cloud, but a human silhouette outlined by the sun. He blinked slowly, struggling to focus. The figure moved closer, crouched beside him. A woman with dark eyes studying him with cautious intensity. Her long black hair was braided with small beads that caught the light. Her face, bronze and angular, revealed nothing of her thoughts. Navajo. The realization came dimly through Jake's fading awareness. His hand twitched toward the revolver at his hip, an instinct born of years on the frontier, but he lacked the strength to draw it. The woman noticed the movement, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she made no move to back away. Instead, she reached for something at her side, a water skin. Jake watched through half-closed eyes as she uncorked it and held it to his lips. The first drops of water were an agony of pleasure. He tried to gulp greedily, but she pulled the skin back, allowing only a small amount at a time. Smart. Too much water too quickly would kill him, as surely as the lack of it. "Thank you," he managed to croak after several small sips had moistened his throat enough for speech. The woman didn't respond. She corked the water skin and sat back on her heels, studying him with unreadable eyes. "You, Navajo?" he asked, his voice rough as sandpaper. A single nod. "Why help me?" The question seemed important somehow, though Jake couldn't have explained why. The woman was silent for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. Then she spoke, her English clear and precise, with only the faintest accent coloring her words. "I made a vow to my husband before he died. I would not let another person die on ancestral land if I could prevent it." "Your husband is dead?" he asked. "1 year ago," she said flatly. She stood in a single fluid movement. Can you walk with help? Jake doubted it, but he nodded anyway. The woman extended a hand and he grasped it, surprised by the strength in her slender arm as she helped pull him to his feet. My shelter's not far, she said. You will rest there until you are stronger. They moved slowly through the desert, Jake leaning heavily against her smaller frame. As they drew closer to a rocky outcropping, Jake could see that the rocks concealed a narrow opening, the entrance to a small cave. Sit, the woman said, gesturing to a flat rock near a small fire pit. Jake sank down gratefully, his legs finally giving out entirely. She handed him the water skin again. Drink slowly. Too much will make you sick. Jake nodded, taking small, measured sips as she moved around the cave, gathering items from her stores. She returned with a clay bowl containing a paste that smelled strongly of herbs. Your wound needs cleaning, she said. Remove your shirt. Jake hesitated, then began unbuttoning his vest and shirt with fumbling fingers. The bullet hole in his left shoulder was an angry red, the skin around it swollen and hot to the touch. Not a good sign. The woman examined the wound critically, then dipped her fingers into the paste. This will hurt, she warned before applying it directly to the injury. Jake hissed through clenched teeth as fire seemed to explode across his shoulder. He gripped the rock beneath him, knuckles white, forcing himself to remain still as she worked the medicine into the wound. Bullet went through, she observed. Good, no digging. She applied the paste to the exit wound on his back as well, then bound both with strips of clean cloth. Medicine will draw out poison, prevent fever. What's your name? He managed to ask as she moved to the fire pit. She paused, glancing up at him. Sarah, she said after a moment. Sarah Eagleheart. Sarah, he repeated, testing the name. I'm Jake. Jake Morgan. He touched his vest where the sheriff's badge was pinned. A flicker of something, wariness perhaps, crossed her face at the mention of his position, but she said nothing, returning her attention to the fire. Jake's sleep was anything but restful. In his dreams, he was back at his Nebraska farmhouse, racing up the porch steps, calling for Mary and David. The door swung open at his touch, revealing the doctor's grim face. You're too late, Sheriff Morgan, the man said, stepping aside. Mary lay on their bed, her auburn hair fanned across the pillow, her skin waxy and pale. David was curled beside her, his small hand still clutching his mother's nightgown. Their bodies were already cold. I tried to get back, Jake whispered, dropping to his knees beside the bed. I rode day and night. The fever was too fast, the doctor said. They asked for you at the end. Jake reached out to touch Mary's face, but before his fingers could make contact, her eyes snapped open, cloudy and unseeing. Where were you, Jake? She rasped. You promised you'd always be there. Jake jerked awake with a strangled cry, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cave was dark save for the dying embers of the fire. Across from him, Sarah sat cross-legged, watching him with those inscrutable eyes. Bad dreams follow those who run from them, she said quietly. Jake dragged a trembling hand across his face, wiping away cold sweat. Wasn't running, just couldn't stay. Sarah added wood to the fire, coaxing the embers back to life. Why were you in desert alone, she asked. No horse, no water. This is death. Jake grimaced. I was tracking the Blackwater gang. They robbed the Copper Creek Bank 2 weeks ago. Took the banker's daughter hostage. Sarah's expression didn't change, but she leaned forward slightly, a sign of interest. Blackwater? Victor Blackwater? Him and his boys have been terrorizing the territory for months. I caught up to them 3 days ago. Jake gestured to his wounded shoulder. There was a shootout. I managed to kill 2 of them and free the girl, but Blackwater and the others got away. Shot my horse out from under me. These men, they are still looking for you. Probably, Jake admitted, though they might think the desert finished their job for them. He looked at her seriously. If they find me here, they won't hesitate to kill you too. I know men like these, she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. White men who take what they want and leave death behind. There was something in her tone that made Jake study her more carefully. Your husband, he said softly. How did he die? Sarah's face became a mask, all emotion carefully hidden away. Raiders, she said curtly. 1 year ago. She stood abruptly and moved to check a pot simmering at the edge of the fire. You should eat. Build strength. I lost my family too, Jake found himself saying, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so long keeping them locked inside. Wife named Mary, son named David, lost them both to fever 6 years ago. I was away chasing a fugitive. By the time I got home, he trailed off, the dream still too raw. I still see their faces, he admitted. Mary's eyes asking why I wasn't there. Damned good question. I've been wearing this star ever since, trying to make it right. But you can't balance lives with a badge. Sarah nodded once, a simple acknowledgement of shared pain that required no further explanation. They sat in silence for a long while after that, two solitary figures bound by nothing more than circumstance and the common experience of loss. The following morning, Jake felt stronger. The fever that had threatened had not materialized, and the wound, though still painful, seemed to be healing cleanly. Strong enough to help out around here, Jake said, flexing his arm carefully. I don't aim to be a burden. Sarah regarded him thoughtfully, then nodded. Can you shoot? Jake patted the Colt single Action Army revolver at his side. Been shooting since I was a boy. He pulled it from its holster, ejecting the spent cartridges and checking the cylinder. Don't suppose you have any .45 rounds? To his surprise, Sarah moved to a small hide pouch and withdrew a handful of bullets, exactly the caliber he needed. Brian, my husband, had same gun, she explained, handing them over. I keep ammunition. Never know when needed. Jake loaded the Colt, the familiar weight of the loaded revolver providing a comfort he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Good, Sarah said. We hunt today. Outside the cave, Sarah handed him a pair of binoculars, gesturing toward a distant ridge. First, we check for danger. Jake raised the binoculars, scanning the horizon methodically. The landscape appeared empty of human presence, but as he adjusted his focus to a more distant ridge, a thin column of smoke caught his attention. There, he said, pointing. Campfire. Sarah took the binoculars, studying the smoke for a long moment. How far? 10 miles, maybe 12, Jake estimated. Could be anyone. Prospectors, travelers, or your Blackwater men, Sarah added grimly. Jake's jaw tightened. We should investigate. If it is Blackwater, I need to know. Not today, Sarah countered firmly. You are not strong enough yet. First we hunt, then we plan. They spent the morning hunting, with Sarah setting snares for rabbits while Jake kept watch. When a desert hare darted from behind a rock, his shot was clean and quick. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good shot. They had collected 2 rabbits and were preparing to head back when a low growl froze them both in place. Jake turned slowly to see a mountain lion crouched on a rock ledge above them, its tawny body tense to spring. Don't move, he whispered to Sarah, raising his revolver with deliberate slowness. The big cat snarled, exposing yellowed fangs. Jake sighted down the barrel, knowing he'd get only one shot. The cat's muscles bunched, preparing to leap. The mountain lion's attack was blindingly fast. Jake fired as it sprang, but the bullet only grazed its shoulder. 60 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into him, knocking him flat. Hot breath filled his nostrils as jaws snapped inches from his throat. He jammed his forearm under the cat's chin, using all his strength to keep those teeth at bay. Pain exploded in his injured shoulder. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. The mountain lion's claws raked his chest, tearing through shirt and skin. Then Sarah was there, her knife flashing in the sunlight. She drove the blade deep into the cat's side with a warrior's cry. The mountain lion howled, twisting toward this new threat. Jake seized the moment, drawing his hunting knife and thrusting upward beneath the cat's ribs and into its heart. The animal stiffened, then collapsed across Jake's body, its dead weight pinning him to the ground. Blood, his and the cat's, soaked into the thirsty desert soil. "Are you alive?" Sarah asked, pushing the mountain lion's carcass off him. Jake groaned. "More or less." He tried to sit up, winced, then fell back. "Maybe less." They made it back to the cave, where Sarah immediately set about treating his wounds. The mountain lion's attack had reopened the bullet wound, and the claw marks, though not life-threatening, would need careful cleaning to prevent infection. As she prepared medicine for his new injuries, Jake found himself studying her movements, the efficient way she worked, her awareness of her surroundings, the calm competence with which she navigated the harsh terrain. "Were you born in these parts?" he asked as she applied a poultice to his chest. "My father was Navajo chief," she replied. "My mother was captured during a raid when young, but became respected healer. I was raised in both worlds." She glanced at him. "And you? You do not seem like most lawmen I have met." Jake smiled faintly. "I was a farmer before I became sheriff. Had land in Nebraska. After Mary and David died, I couldn't stand to be there anymore. Too many memories." "Hunting bad men instead of facing ghosts?" Sarah observed. The comment struck uncomfortably close to home. "Something like that," Jake admitted. By sunset, Jake's wounds had been tended, and Sarah had returned to retrieve the mountain lion carcass. She set about skinning it with practiced efficiency, preserving the meat and stretching the hide. They were about to settle for the night when a sound from outside the cave made them both freeze. Sarah extinguished the fire with a swift movement, plunging the cave into darkness. Jake reached for his revolver, ignoring the protest from his injured shoulder. A scuffling sound drew closer, followed by a groan. In the fading twilight, they could make out a figure slumped against the rocks outside. A man, white, perhaps in his 40s, dressed in buckskins that were torn and bloodied. "Don't! Shoot!" the man managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not looking for trouble." "Who are you?" Jake demanded, keeping his revolver trained on the stranger. "What are you doing here?" The man licked dry lips, clearly struggling to remain conscious. "Name's Nathan Reed. Hunter. Was tracking deer when they found me." "They?" Jake pressed. "Who found you?" "Blackwater," Reed whispered, his eyes widening slightly at Jake's sharp intake of breath. "Blackwater and his boys. Thought I was tracking them. Shot me. Left me for dead." Jake and Sarah exchanged a significant look. If Reed was telling the truth, then the Blackwater gang was indeed still in the area, and still dangerous. "How many men with Blackwater?" Jake asked urgently. Reed's eyes began to close again, consciousness slipping away. "5, maybe 6, he murmured, heading east, looking for something. His head lolled to one side as he passed out again. Together they managed to half-carry, half-drag Reed's unconscious form into the cave. Sarah immediately set about examining his wound more thoroughly. "Bullet still inside," she reported grimly. "Must come out or infection will kill him." For the next hour, Jake maintained a vigilant post near the cave entrance while Sarah worked to save Reed's life. Occasionally, the hunter's agonized cries carried into the night, making Jake wince in sympathy as he scanned the moonlit desert with increased alertness. As Reed slept fitfully, Jake caught fragments of the hunter's fevered ramblings. "Map, silver, caves, Hargrove will pay, sacred ground." Jake frowned. This wasn't the delirium of a simple hunter caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Reed knew something about whatever Blackwater was seeking. Dawn was breaking when Reed finally regained consciousness, his face pale and sheen with sweat, but his eyes clear. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raspy from thirst. Sarah brought him water while Jake explained their discovery of him outside the cave and Sarah's surgery to remove the bullet. "Thank you," Reed said sincerely. "Both of you. I didn't expect to wake up again after Blackwater's boys finished with me." "You mentioned them last night," Jake said, studying the man carefully. Said they shot you because they thought you were tracking them. Reed nodded weakly. Trail led me right into their camp just before sunset. His expression darkened. They didn't even ask questions, just started shooting the moment they spotted me. Did you hear what they were doing out here? Jake asked, trying to sound casual. Seems an odd place for outlaws to camp. They weren't exactly sharing their plans with the man they were trying to kill, Reed said dryly, but I got the impression they were looking for something. Navajo silver? Sarah suggested quietly. Reed's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise evident in his expression. How did you know about that? You spoke of it in your fever, she explained. Said it many times. In Hargrove. The hunter sighed, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Guess there's no point hiding it now. Yeah, that's what Blackwater's after. He's got some kind of map he claims shows the location of a hidden Navajo treasure trove. No such treasure exists, Sarah said firmly. Reed shrugged his good shoulder. Maybe, maybe not. But Blackwater believes it does, and he's willing to kill anyone who gets in his way. He looked directly at Jake, including a sheriff who might be inclined to interfere. Jake tensed. How do you know I'm a sheriff? Reed nodded toward Jake's vest where the tarnished silver star was still pinned. Wasn't hard to figure out. Besides, I heard about what happened in Copper Creek. Word travels even out here. What were you really doing out here, Reed? Jake asked bluntly. Truth this time. Reed held his gaze for a long moment, then sighed. All right. I wasn't just hunting deer. He shifted uncomfortably. I'm a scout. Work sometimes for the Army, sometimes for private parties. I was hired by a man in Tucson to map this region. Why? Sarah asked, her expression guarded. Railroad's coming, Reed explained. Not now. Maybe not for years, but eventually. My employer wants to know the best routes, the resources available. So you know this area well? Jake asked, changing tack. Reed nodded cautiously. Well enough. Been working these parts for about 3 months now. Know of any place nearby that might be more defensible than this cave? Somewhere we could hold off Blackwater and his boys if they come looking? The hunter considered the question, his face thoughtful. There's an old cavalry outpost about 15 miles northeast of here, he said finally. Been abandoned since the war, but the walls were still standing last time I passed through. Good sight lines, defensible position. Jake glanced at Sarah, noting her surprised expression. You know this place? He asked her. She nodded slowly. Yes, old fort built on Navajo land. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Reed. Strange you would know of it. It is not on any white man's maps. Like I said, I've been scouting this region for months. Found it by accident while tracking a mountain lion. Convenient accident, Sarah observed, her tone neutral but her eyes suspicious. Regardless of how he knows about it, the fort might be our best option, Jake said. We can't stay here. There's only one way in or out, and Blackwater's men could bottle us up without breaking a sweat. I am not leaving my shelter, Sarah said firmly. This is my home. It's not safe anymore, Jake argued gently. If Blackwater's men are searching the area, they'll find this place eventually. The fort would give us a better chance if it comes to a fight. Sarah was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally she spoke, her voice low but resolute. There is something I must tell you about the fort. Both men turned to her expectantly. It was not built by accident in this place, she continued. It was built deliberately on sacred Navajo ground. Her dark eyes fixed on Reed with renewed suspicion. Ground that some might consider valuable. Understanding dawned on Jake. The Navajo silver Blackwater is looking for. It's not a treasure in the usual sense, is it? Sarah shook her head slowly. No. It is a burial place where great chiefs were laid to rest with ceremonial items. Some made of silver, some with turquoise, and other stones white men find precious. Her expression hardened. To disturb such a place is sacrilege. And you think that's what Blackwater's after? Grave goods would not be first time white men rob Navajo dead, Sarah replied bitterly. Reed had gone very still during this exchange, his expression carefully neutral. If that's true, he said slowly, then Blackwater's on a fool's errand. Unless he knows something we don't, Jake countered, his lawman's instincts prickling. What if there is something valuable buried there? Something worth killing for? There is nothing, Sarah insisted, only sacred items. Either way, Jake said, the fort seems like our best option. Not only is it more defensible, but if it is built on the sacred ground, we'd be in position to protect it from Blackwater and his men. Sarah considered this, clearly torn between her reluctance to abandon her shelter and the logic of Jake's argument. Finally, she nodded once decisively. We will go to the fort, she agreed, not to hide but to protect what is sacred. She turned to Reed, her gaze direct and challenging. If that is truly your intention as well, the hunter met her eyes steadily. I'm just trying to survive, ma'am. Same as you. Before leaving, Sarah stood alone in the center of the cave for a long moment, her eyes closed, lips moving in what might have been a silent prayer. When she emerged, her face was composed, her shoulders straight. I am ready, she said simply. They set off as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, heading northeast across the desert floor. Jake took the lead, his lawman's instincts on high alert for any sign of Blackwater's gang. Reed followed, moving with careful deliberation to avoid aggravating his wound. Sarah brought up the rear, her eyes constantly scanning their back trail. By mid-morning, Jake could see Reed was struggling. The hunter's face had gone gray with pain, and his breathing had become labored. When they reached a large rock formation that offered some shade, Jake called a halt. As they shared water from one of the skins, Jake checked the back trail. No sign of pursuit yet, but they were leaving tracks even a novice could follow. They pushed on through the heat of midday, taking advantage of what little shade they could find along the way. It was late afternoon when they reached the spring Sarah had mentioned. They refilled their skins and washed the dust from their faces and hands. Jake was checking their back trail again when he spotted movement on a distant ridge. Company, he said quietly, ducking back into the shelter of the rocks. 3 riders, maybe a mile back. Sarah and Reed joined him, studying the distant figures. Scouts, Reed said grimly. Blackwater will have split his men to cover more ground. We need to thin them out, Jake decided. Set up an ambush. Reed nodded. There's a narrow passage about half a mile ahead. Perfect choke point. They moved quickly, finding the passage Reed had described, a narrow gap between towering rock walls where only one rider could pass at a time. Jake positioned himself on a ledge above the entrance, while Sarah and Reed continued ahead to find cover. The 3 riders appeared within 20 minutes, following their trail with the ease of experienced trackers. Jake recognized one of them, Tom Wilson, Blackwater's second-in-command, a man with a reputation for cruelty that rivaled his bosses. When all 3 were within the passage, Jake made his move. He fired twice in rapid succession, hitting one of the young guns in the shoulder and sending Wilson's horse rearing in panic. The narrow walls amplified the gunshots to a deafening roar. "Drop your weapons," he shouted. "You're trapped." Wilson's laugh was ugly. "That's you, Morgan. Thought you were dead." "I'm full of surprises," Jake called back, keeping his revolver trained on the passage. "Tell your boys to throw down their guns, and nobody else needs to get hurt." "That's not how this works, Sheriff," Wilson replied. "Blackwater wants you dead, and what Blackwater wants, Blackwater gets." Jake heard a horse's hooves moving deeper into the passage, Wilson trying to slip through to the other side, where Sarah and Reed waited. "I wouldn't go that way if I were you," Jake warned. A shot rang out from ahead, followed by a cry of pain. "Told you," Jake said. For several tense minutes, the standoff continued. Then Jake heard hushed voices from within the passage, the men arguing among themselves. "Last chance, Wilson," Jake called out. "Surrender now, and I'll see you get a fair trial." "Go to hell, Morgan." The response was followed by the sudden thunder of hooves as all three riders made a desperate break for the far end of the passage. Jake fired at the fleeing men, but his shot went wide. A fusillade of gunfire erupted ahead, Sarah and Reed engaging the escaping riders. When Jake reached the far end of the passage, he found one horse dead, another fleeing riderless, and the third nowhere to be seen. Reed was kneeling beside the body of one of the young guns, shaking his head. "Got him clean through the heart," he reported. "Other ones hit but got away on foot. No sign of Wilson. He'll be headed back to Blackwater," Jake said grimly. "We need to move faster." Sarah appeared from behind a rock formation, rifle in hand. "I wounded the third man," she said. "He will not go far." They claimed the dead man's weapons and ammunition, then continued their journey with renewed urgency. As dusk approached, they crested a final rise and saw their destination spread out before them. The abandoned fort stood on a plateau about a half-mile ahead, its stone walls weathered but largely intact. "There it is," Jake said, relief evident in his voice despite their circumstances. "We made it." They reached the fort without further incident, passing through the gap where the main gate had once stood. Inside, they found a courtyard overgrown with desert vegetation, with several stone buildings arrayed around the perimeter. "Over there," Jake directed, nodding toward what looked to be the officers' quarters. "Should be more defensible than the barracks." They settled Reed on a makeshift bed, and Jake went to check the rest of the fort while Sarah tended to Reed's aggravated wound. The walls were indeed defensible, with narrow firing slits positioned at regular intervals. The watchtowers offered excellent visibility of the surrounding terrain. If they had to make a stand against Blackwater's gang, they could certainly do worse than this position. As he completed his circuit of the fort, Jake found himself at the far corner of the compound, where a small stone building stood slightly apart from the others. This one bore markings that didn't appear military in nature, symbols carved into the lintel above the door. Inside, he found a single room with a stone altar at the center. The walls were decorated with faded paintings in the distinctive style of Navajo religious art. He was studying one of the wall paintings when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway, her face solemn as she surveyed the room. "You found it," she said quietly. "The sacred place." Jake nodded. "I wasn't sure what it was. Some kind of chapel?" "More than chapel," Sarah replied, stepping inside. "Entrance to burial caves where ancestors rest." She moved to the altar, running her fingers lightly over the worn stone surface. "Army-built fort around it. Did not understand what they disturbed." "The burial caves are beneath us?" Jake asked, suddenly understanding why the fort's location was significant. Sarah nodded. "Deep underground. Many passages, many chambers. Place of great power." She looked at him directly. "Place Blackwater seeks to desecrate." The gravity of their situation settled more heavily on Jake's shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving or even bringing Blackwater to justice anymore. It was about protecting something ancient and sacred from those who would violate it for profit. How does Reed fit into all this? He wondered aloud. If he's really just a scout, why would he know about this place? "Good question," came a voice from the doorway. They turned to find Reed standing there, pale and unsteady, but upright, supported by the doorframe. His eyes were alert and focused in a way that sent warning signals through Jake's mind. "You shouldn't be up," Jake said cautiously, his hand drifting toward his holstered revolver. Reed smiled thinly. "Remarkable what necessity can accomplish." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "So this is it, the entrance to the caves." He looked back at Jake. "And to answer your question, Sheriff, I know about this place because it's my job to know. I wasn't entirely honest with you before." "No kidding," Jake said dryly. "Want to try the truth this time?" Reed straightened up with visible effort. "I work for a private collector, Hargrove. Wealthy man, interested in native artifacts." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I was hired to find the burial caves, map them, report back so Hargrove could organize a collection expedition." "You mean grave robbery," Sarah said coldly. Reed winced. That's what it amounts to, yes. I didn't think of it that way at first. Told myself it was archaeological research, preservation of a dying culture. He shook his head. But I've seen the caves. Disturbing them felt wrong. And Blackwater? Jake asked. How does he fit in? Muscle, Reed replied. Hired protection in case of trouble. He wasn't supposed to know the exact location, just provide security once we found it. But he double-crossed you, Jake surmised. Reed nodded grimly. In Copper Creek, we were supposed to meet Hargrove's contact at the bank to receive the final payment and detailed maps. But Blackwater got greedy, decided to rob the bank instead, take the money and the maps, cut out the middleman entirely. Before Jake could respond, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Sarah signaling urgently from near the window. He hurried to her side, Reed following at a distance. What is it? Jake asked as he reached her. Sarah pointed to the north, where a line of torches had appeared along the ridge. My people, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I sensed signal smoke yesterday. They have come. Jake counted at least 15 figures silhouetted against the night sky, their torches creating a line of fire along the horizon. Relief surged through him. Reinforcements had arrived, and not a moment too soon. They will not enter fight unless necessary, Sarah explained, but they watch, bear witness. Blackwater knows now he faces more than 3 defenders. No sooner had she spoken than a new disturbance caught their attention, hoofbeats approaching from the east. Blackwater, Reed said grimly, peering through the gathering darkness. Right on schedule. Jake moved quickly to the eastern wall, climbing to the watchtower for a better view. In the fading light, he could make out 6 riders approaching at a gallop. At their head rode a broad-shouldered man with a distinctive red bandana, Victor Blackwater himself. 6 riders, Jake reported as he rejoined Sarah and Reed. Looks like he brought everyone. Take position in the northwest tower, Jake ordered Reed. Sarah, the southeast. I'll cover the main entrance. As darkness fell completely, the riders halted about 100 yards from the fort. Blackwater approached on foot, stopping about 30 yards from the gate. Morgan, he called, his voice a rough growl. Didn't expect to see you alive after our last meeting. I'm full of surprises, Jake replied, keeping to the shadows. What do you want, Blackwater? I know what's inside that fort. Old burial caves, valuable artifacts. You let me and my boys take what we came for. We ride away. Everyone lives. And if we refuse... Blackwater's laugh was cold. Then nobody leaves here breathing? Jake glanced towards Sarah, catching her eye across the courtyard. Her expression was resolute. The caves are sacred to the Navajo people, Jake called back. They're not yours to plunder. Don't get righteous with me, Sheriff, Blackwater sneered. You've got no jurisdiction out here, no authority. You're just a wounded man with an empty badge. Jake felt the truth of those words bite deep, but then he looked at Sarah again, saw the fierce determination in her eyes, and knew some things ran deeper than badges and jurisdiction. You're right about one thing, Blackwater, Jake called. I am just a man, but those caves don't belong to you or me. He stepped into view, revolver ready at his side. So here's my counteroffer. Ride away now, and I won't put a bullet between your eyes. Blackwater stared at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground. Have it your way, Morgan. He turned and walked back to his men. Kill them all, Nawoon, he ordered. Burn the place down if you have to. The attack began immediately, a barrage of rifle fire peppering the fort walls. For the next hour, the battle settled into a pattern of thrust and parry. Blackwater's men would probe for weaknesses, and the defenders would drive them back with well-placed shots. Then Blackwater changed tactics. 2 of his men circled around to the back of the fort, attempting to scale the wall while the others provided covering fire. Sarah, Reed, back wall, Jake shouted, racing across the courtyard. Gunfire erupted as the 2 outlaws dropped into the compound. Jake dove for cover as bullets splintered the wood around him. He rolled to his feet, firing twice in quick succession. One of the intruders dropped, but the other found cover behind the old stable. Sarah appeared at Jake's side, her rifle ready. "I will flank him," she said, already moving toward the building's far side. The outlaw, sensing movement, fired wildly in Sarah's direction. The distraction gave Jake the opening he needed. He stepped out from cover and fired once, the shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Outside the walls, Blackwater bellowed with rage at the failure of his men's attack. "Burn them out," he ordered. "Set fire to the gate." But before they could act, war cries cut through the night air. The Navajo warriors had decided to enter the fight. They descended on horseback, their sudden appearance throwing Blackwater's men into confusion. In the chaos that followed, Jake lost track of Blackwater himself. The outlaw leader had disappeared from his position. "Where's Blackwater?" Jake shouted to Reed. "Don't see him," Reed replied, scanning the battlefield. "Wait, there, heading for the chapel building." Jake turned to see Blackwater ducking into the small structure that housed the entrance to the burial caves. He'd obviously figured out where the supposed treasure was located and was making one last desperate attempt to reach it. "Sarah!" Jake called, already moving toward the stairs. "Blackwater's in the chapel." Together, they raced across the courtyard. They burst into the chapel to find Blackwater at the altar, frantically searching for the mechanism that would reveal the entrance to the caves. He spun at their entrance, pistol raised. "Back off, Sheriff," he snarled. "I didn't come this far to leave empty-handed." Jake kept his revolver trained on the outlaw's chest. "It's over, Blackwater. Your men are done. The Navajo have the fort surrounded. There's nowhere left to run." "You will not desecrate this place," Sarah said, her voice calm but implacable. "The ancestors will not allow it." Blackwater laughed, an ugly sound. "Your ancestors are dead, woman. All that's left is what they were buried with. And that's coming with me." Jake saw the outlaw's finger tighten on the trigger and threw himself sideways, tackling Sarah to the ground as Blackwater's shot exploded in the confined space. The bullet struck the wall where she had been standing. Jake rolled to his feet, firing as he rose. His first shot went wide, but the second caught Blackwater in the arm, causing him to drop his pistol. The outlaw staggered back against the altar, clutching his bleeding limb. "It's finished," Jake said, keeping his revolver steady. "You're under arrest for robbery, kidnapping, and murder." Blackwater's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. Then, with surprising speed for a wounded man, he lunged for his fallen weapon. Jake fired again, the shot striking Blackwater square in the chest. The outlaw leader collapsed across the stone altar, blood pooling beneath him. Jake approached cautiously, kicking Blackwater's pistol well out of reach before checking for signs of life. There were none. Victor Blackwater had died as he had lived, violently in pursuit of wealth that had never been his to claim. Outside, the sounds of fighting had diminished. Jake helped Sarah to her feet, checking her quickly for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She shook her head. "No. You?" "Just bruises," he assured her. They emerged from the chapel to find the battle over. The remaining outlaws had surrendered or fled, and the Navajo warriors were securing the fort. "The elders will perform ceremony tonight," Sarah said after consulting with her people, "to cleanse sacred place of blood and violence. Tomorrow, they will move entrance to caves, hide it where no white man will find again." "Good," Jake said sincerely. "It should remain protected." That evening, as the stars emerged in the desert sky, Jake found Sarah sitting alone on the fort wall, gazing out over the landscape bathed in moonlight. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, making space beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the sounds of the Navajo camp drifting up from the courtyard below. "What will you do now?" Jake asked finally. "Return to your cave?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "The elder has asked me to return with them. He says my knowledge of both worlds is valuable, can help protect our sacred places better in future." "That's good," Jake said, genuinely pleased for her. "You found your place again." "Not as before," she replied softly. "But enough." She turned to face him directly. "And you, Jake Morgan? Will you return to being sheriff?" Jake touched the tarnished star on his vest, considering the question. The past few days had changed something fundamental inside him. The badge that had once given his life purpose now felt like a weight, a reminder of the years he'd spent running from his grief rather than healing from it. Mary's face flashed in his mind, not the cold, accusing visage from his nightmares, but as she'd been in life, warm and full of life. For the first time in years, the memory didn't bring pain. "No," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I don't think I will." He unpinned the star from his vest and held it in his palm, studying its dull surface in the moonlight. This badge was never about justice. It was about running from ghosts. Time to stop running. With a deliberate motion, he drew back his arm and hurled the badge out into the darkness of the desert. It caught the moonlight once as it tumbled through the air, then vanished. "And what will you build in its place?" Sarah asked. Jake smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way it hadn't for years. "I don't know yet, but something better. Something that honors the past without being trapped by it." Sarah reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew something that caught the moonlight with a silver gleam, a bracelet of intricate design embedded with turquoise stones. "This was Brian's," she said, "given to him by his father. He would want it worn by someone who understands the value of what we protect." She placed it in Jake's palm, closing his fingers over it with both her hands. "A bond between us, a vow stronger than words." Jake understood the profound significance of the gift. Not merely jewelry, but a physical manifestation of trust, of shared purpose, of a future neither had imagined possible days ago. "The desert takes much," Sarah said, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "But it also gives to those who learn its ways." "I'll wear it with honor," Jake promised, slipping the bracelet onto his wrist. The silver felt cool against his skin, a tangible reminder of all that had changed. As the night deepened around them, they remained on the fort wall, two souls who had found unexpected connection in the harsh wilderness of the desert. Behind them, the Navajo maintained their vigilant protection of the sacred caves. Before them stretched the vast, star-washed landscape, no longer an enemy to be conquered, but a witness to their transformation. Jake gazed at the eastern horizon, where the faintest hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. "You know, for 6 years I've been walking through life like a dead man," he said quietly. "Wearing that badge, hunting men like Blackwater. It kept me moving, but it wasn't living." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Now I feel like I'm waking up." Jake ran his fingers over the intricate silverwork of the bracelet. "Maybe that's what this desert does. Strips everything away until you face what you've been avoiding." Reed approached from the courtyard below, calling up to them. "Morgan, you might want to see this." They followed him to the edge of the fort that faced the western hills. In the distance, a lone figure sat astride a horse on a rocky outcropping, silhouetted against the night sky. Wilson, Blackwater's right-hand man, the only one who had escaped the battle. "He's been there for an hour," Reed explained. "Watching." Jake studied the distant figure thoughtfully. "He's no threat now, not alone." "No," Reed agreed, "but he'll be back. Men like that don't forget." "Let him come," Sarah said with quiet confidence. "We will be ready." As they watched, Wilson raised his hand in a gesture that might have been a salute or a threat, then wheeled his horse and disappeared into the darkness. But that was a story for another day. For now, in this moment of hard-won peace, Jake Morgan had found something he'd thought lost forever: the possibility of a new beginning.